Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello everyone, and welcome to Work in Progress, the Personal Productivity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I am your host, Joanna. Let's get started. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Work in Progress, our personal productivity podcast. I am your host, Joanna, and today we are going to be chatting about procrastination and understanding the psychology behind delayed productivity. And joining me today is our guest, Alla Demutska. With more than 12 years of clinical experience, Alla is the Clinical Director of Counselling and Psychotherapy at the School of Positive Psychology in Singapore. She has also studied and worked in Melbourne before moving to Singapore. Hi, Alla. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, Joanna. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. It's our pleasure. Before we get started, I'd love if you could tell us a bit more about yourself and what you do.
So I've moved to Singapore maybe about 5 years ago, and I was teaching lecturing at the university, supervising students, and now I'm at the School of Positive Psychology. And I really love what I'm doing in Singapore. And before that, I was in Melbourne. I had my private practice in Melbourne, and I also worked in psychiatric hospitals in Melbourne. So I've gained a lot of clinical experience while I was in Australia.
Great. And what made you want to move to Singapore?
There were a few reasons. I'm going to go back to Australia at some point. Just wanted to experience another culture. So I'm originally from Ukraine. And I moved to Australia a long time ago and felt like I settled in well and had a fantastic experience there. And then I thought that it will be very useful for me to experience another culture. So here I am in Singapore.
Lovely. Well, I'd love to get to know you more with a section we call Have You Met Alla? So here I'm just going to ask you a few questions and you can just say the first thing that comes to mind. So do you have a favorite book?
I don't have a favorite book. I have a long list of favorite books, and it's the same about the movies. It would be very difficult for me to name one favorite book.
Okay, if you could pick maybe a couple books and movies, what would you suggest?
For example, I would say that Dostoevsky is one of my favorite writers. In terms of psychotherapy books, Irving Yalom, I love most of his books. I think they are so beautifully describing human nature, and his approach to how he treats his patients is just so inspiring. So I usually recommend my students to read his books. And in terms of the movies, the one that comes to mind, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. But again, it's hard to name one or even three because I love so many movies.
Yeah, well, those are some great suggestions, and your movie suggestion was really great. A few of my friends have recommended that one to me, but I haven't gotten around to watching it, so I definitely should.
Yeah.
Great. So my next question is, do you listen to podcasts at all, and do you have a favorite?
Yes, I listen to quite a few podcasts. So recently, I would say I listen to a lot of psychology podcasts, specifically trauma podcasts, let's say EMDR, eye movement desensitization, reprocessing, but more kind of general style podcasts. I listen to a lot of Andrew Huberman. And he talks about, I don't know, have you listened to his podcast before?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So he talks a lot actually about productivity, improving attention, improving brain functioning, improving physical health, and most recent protocols for how to achieve optimal physical and mental health. So I listen to a lot of his recommendations and often implement them if I can.
Great. Thank you for sharing those with us. And lastly, I'd love to ask if you have a famous role model or even just anyone you look up to.
I would say I would name Irving Yalom again. So if I think about a psychotherapist I would like to be, um, that would be him, his level of humanity towards his patients, his level of humility, his level of being honest with himself and being honest with the readers of his books. I really admire him. And I had the chance to see him in person when I went to the conference to US. And it's really funny when I was standing in line waiting for the book to be signed by him. I was crying. I was so overwhelmed by emotions that someone I admire so much finally will meet him in person. Well, very briefly, but so that's my idol, if I can say so.
Yeah, that's really great. And not a lot of people get to meet the people that they look up to and find inspirational. So that would have been a great experience.
Yes, certainly I was very lucky. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I'd love to jump into our interview for today. So, my first question for you is, what is your personal definition of procrastination?
So procrastination is the act of delaying or putting off tasks until the last minute, even when we are aware of some of the negative consequences and outcomes of this delay.
Okay, and how does it differ from like occasional productivity delays? Like once in a while, you're like, oh, I don't really want to do that. I'll do that later.
It is different from occasional productivity delays because occasional productivity delays are quite normal. And basically, they are not habitual or chronic, and they usually do not incur such negative consequences as procrastination does.
Interesting. And I know that a lot of people like to say that they're procrastinators and they procrastinate a lot, but why do you think it's important to understand the psychology behind procrastination?
I think it is very important. One reason is because a lot of us are affected by procrastination. So if you look at the statistics, adult population, I think it's about 20% of people would say that they're chronic procrastinations. It's much higher in student population as well. And basically, if you think about procrastination and the consequences of procrastination, um, it, basically, there's a lot of difficulties that come with that. For example, symptoms of anxiety, depression, stress, not achieving the goals, maybe not progressing as well in their careers, impacting even physical health as well. So there's a lot of consequences for procrastination. That's why it's very important to address it.
Yeah, and how does this impact like not only our personal development, but also like our professional development and us in our careers?
For a lot of people who procrastinate, they might have really great uh, abilities. They are very talented people, creative, but the difficulties starting, finishing tasks really impede their career. They might be known as unreliable. They might not produce as much outcomes or as much work that they could because of the procrastination, and they might not be enjoying their work as much, which will also be affecting their level of productivity and creativity.
Yeah, and do you know what like strategies people might be able to use to overcome procrastination or understand it better?
I think before we talk about strategies, it's probably better to understand what are some of the reasons why people
Yeah.
procrastinate. So I would say that procrastination is linked to intolerance of distress, intolerance of difficult emotions. And so this can be linked to various factors. For example, the task at hand can be quite aversive or boring. So it's intolerance of boredom. It can be that the task is quite complex and the person might feel quite overwhelmed. It can be that the person believes that they need to do everything perfectly or really well, and they feel like failures, or they're afraid that they will not do the task to their standards, so they procrastinate. So it's basically there's a lot of different beliefs that can contribute to this negative emotions, to distress that the person feels when they're attempting the task, and this will be leading to procrastination. There will be other factors. For example, it can be as simple as environment around the person. For example, it can be that they feel there's a very noisy environment, very distracting environment, and or to the contrary, some students, they work at home and they feel very isolated, and it's very difficult to start focusing on on the task at hand. So instead of, they can go to the library instead. But basically, if you think about the psychology of procrastination, it's about understanding why are you procrastinating, what is going on for you, and understanding are there specific tasks, or is it every task that you're procrastinating on? How do you procrastinate? Some people procrastinate by going on social media. Some people procrastinate by doing something at home. For example, they start cleaning their apartment. But what was the most important, you need to understand what is causing it. So what is the negative emotion that you are avoiding? And what is linked to this negative emotion? Is it your fear of failure? Is it that you believe that this task is completely meaningless and you feel bored? Is it that you believe that another person, for example, will be thinking less of you if what you are doing is less than perfect? So just trying to understand what are some of the thoughts that are linked to this emotion that you're experiencing. And also then see if you can change the environment if there's environmental factors that are also not helping you to start the task.
Okay, and if someone's noticed that there's a specific task that they're procrastinating and it's something that they want to do, but they just can't bring themselves to do it, what should they do about that situation?
Ask themselves, stopping and ask themselves a question: what am I feeling right now? What is the emotion? What is the discomfort that I'm feeling? And then try to understand what is linked to this uncomfortable feeling. What am I afraid of? What am I overwhelmed about? And really understand the cause behind it. And often when we understand the cause, it already feels and seems much more manageable. When we say, when you name it, you can tame it. So it's about asking yourself these questions, slowing down, noticing that you're procrastinating, because often some people, it becomes such a habit that they just start procrastinating without even recognizing that they're doing it. They sit down, open their computer, and then find themselves 15 minutes later on Facebook, scrolling down. 15 minutes, it's good if it's 15 minutes. Often it can be an hour later. and not even registering that they're doing that. So it's about, first of all, registering, noticing, and asking, what is happening for me right now? What am I feeling? What is the cause? What am I afraid of? What is stressing me?
Yeah, and Alla, I'd love to go back to the strategies now, since we've discussed a bit of the why this happens. Are there any strategies that we can use if we've identified that we do procrastinate and there are things we want to do, but we just can't bring ourselves to do it because of maybe an underlying emotion, for example?
So I think one of the first important strategy is for people to understand what is procrastination and how it works, and really understand their own procrastination. It's very important for my clients to understand that by avoiding doing the tasks and engaging in some pleasurable activities like YouTube, scrolling through Instagram, what they're doing, they're reinforcing that next time procrastination will happen again, because basically you are rewarding this behavior. My clients would feel discomfort, some negative emotion, and then they distract themselves from that. And it does work short term, but it brings a lot of long-term negative consequences. So, what happens, and happens in other addictive behaviors. So the short-term relief of pain means that next time it will be much more likely that we'll repeat the cycle again. So it happens. It's very addictive, basically. So this is basically one of the first steps: understanding procrastination, understanding how it works, understanding what you're doing that will make procrastination continue. And what is very important is also understand the causes for your procrastination. So what happens to you? What is the discomfort that you're feeling when you're facing a task and you procrastinate on that task? Is it a feeling of anxiety? Is it fear? Is it boredom? What is it that you are avoiding? And think about what is linked to these feelings. So what are some of the beliefs that are linked to this feeling? For example, if the task is boring, you might be thinking, I shouldn't be assigned such a boring task like this. Why me? I'm wasting my time. If it's anxiety, you might be thinking, I need to be able to achieve the best possible result. My boss is going to be really upset if I don't do something perfectly. So really think about what is linked. What are some of the thoughts that are linked to your procrastination? And so understanding some of these beliefs, understanding these thoughts, it's about challenging and looking, is it really true? Is it really, are your beliefs based on reality? And sometimes in therapy, we use cognitive behavioral therapy to work with difficult thoughts like that. So it can be going to therapists who can help to address, uncover some of these thoughts. But of course, you can start yourself asking these questions yourself. Then you can also look into your environment as well. A lot of people underestimate the effect of their environment, and it actually can be really important. For example, I have a student who was working at home and trying to finish their thesis at home on their own, and couldn't do it, and was constantly procrastinating and feeling like a failure, which contributed to their stress levels, meaning that they'll procrastinate even more. However, just changing the environment and going to the lab where there were other students who were also working on their thesis, which helped tremendously. So their procrastination stopped just by changing the environment. So that can be some of the steps that can be helpful, but there will be other steps as well. It really depends on the person. For example, it can be understanding how you can actually break down the tasks. If the task is really overwhelming, can you break it down into the chunks, either chunks of time? For example, I'm going to just work on it for 10, 15 minutes, or I'm going to write 200 words. There's lots of other techniques that are available, Pomodoro techniques, for example. There's lots of productivity kind of base techniques that you can search and find on the internet. But it's basically will be really individual, based on the individual needs and what is happening for them and why they are struggling.
Great. And what are some of the challenges that come up when we start to face our procrastination and deal with it and try to overcome it?
So there can be quite a bit of challenges for some people. For example, I usually teach my clients mindfulness and self-compassion skills. So mindfulness will help a person to become more aware. Okay, what is slowing down? What is going on for me? What am I feeling? And self-compassion, it's about talking to yourself in a much more kind way, with warmth, with understanding. And some clients might resist. They're so used to being very critical and harsh towards themselves. So just believing that changing this voice to more compassionate voice and that it can be helpful can take quite a bit of time and trial and error to see how it can work for them. For some of my clients, it can be that procrastination serves as almost as a protection of their self-worth, because if I don't try, if it's procrastination, it means I haven't really tried. It's not that I'm not capable. It's because I can't manage my time, and because I procrastinated. And so that's why I didn't manage to succeed. So that can be another reason why clients might be struggling to address procrastination. It's also quite difficult to break a habit, because procrastination is also a habit. So you've been doing that, and maybe you still manage to submit your assignments even though you work the whole night and just before the deadline. But it's kind of a habit how you're doing it, and it can be quite difficult to break.
Yeah, and I know that we've talked about some emotional factors that might come up while we face procrastination, but are there any psychological factors that contribute to, procrastination and how it manifests in individuals?
Well, emotional factor is a psychological factor.
Yeah. Are there any other sort of psychological factors that might contribute to this?
Yeah, so there will be beliefs. So there will be, as I said, there will be avoidance of difficult emotions. There will be some negative beliefs about themselves, so about their work or about the task. They can be behavioral factors, which, as I said, it's habit. You kind of, it's breaking this particular habit. So it's a combination of everything. So I would say that that's why it's so important to kind of break it down for a person, and to understand, what am I feeling? What are some of the emotions that I'm trying to avoid with my procrastination, with the short-term relief? And what are the thoughts that are linked to these emotions? And what are some of my habits that I can start breaking? And it can include changing the environment. And it can be as simple as taking your phone that is on the table and moving it to the next room. It can be creating a difficult password for your Facebook so you can't log in very easily. So it can be simple strategies like this to break the behavioral patterns as well.
Yeah, and how can an individual, while they're trying to manage their procrastination, balance between self-compassion but also taking accountability and recognizing when they are being, when they are procrastinating?
I love this question. I think it's a really great one because I think it's quite a bit of misconception about self-compassion. And so some people assume that when you're compassionate, you become permissive. But this is not, self-compassion is not about being permissive and just allowing yourself not to do anything. That's not self-compassion. So when I think about it, the metaphor that I like to use for my clients is metaphor of good parent. So for example, if you are a good parent and your child doesn't want to go to school, um, it's not about saying, oh, yeah, you don't want to go to school, that's fine. Oh, you don't want to go tomorrow, that's fine. So it's about trying to understand what is going on and how can I help my child to get to school, knowing that this is important. So it's kind of the same attitude towards yourself. So if I'm struggling with something, how can I be loving and kind, but at the same time quite firm?
Yeah.
Okay, so what do I need to do? What is not working? What do I need to change? What support do I need to get from my friends, from my therapist, and helping yourself? Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like it can get quite stressful, especially if you're not getting the tasks that you want to get done, or things that you really want to do, but you're putting them off for some reason. So that can be quite stressful and it can make you feel quite anxious. And I feel like people might have the tendency to beat themselves up about it and make them feel worse about themselves for not being able to do it. So how do you deal with those negative emotions?
So it's really important to understand for people that by procrastination is avoidance of negative emotion, of some sort of distress.
Yeah.
So if you are beating yourself up, then you feel more stressed, you will feel more anxious, which means that it's much more likely that you will procrastinate even more. So what we need to reduce is this amount of additional stress that comes through criticism, through harsh self-talk, because it will only increase your procrastination. So you need to decrease your level of stress rather than increase it.
Yeah, and I'd love to move into our practices and habits so we can apply more of what we've talked about to a specific strategy. So, do you have maybe a method or something more specific you could recommend to employ when we're trying to improve our procrastination?
Mm, um, I can probably list a variety of things that can be helpful. What I usually do, I would sit with my clients and really um, go through what is going on for them, so I can really help them with the specific strategies. However, if you think about some general strategies. So first of all, as I said, recognizing the behavior. So it's important to be able to distinguish between you when you're procrastinating and when your productivity is affected by other factors such as lack of resources, maybe unclear instructions, unrealistic expectations. You can use self-monitoring tools, for example, journal, um, some app to track your tasks, possibly. So writing things down, trying to understand your triggers, causes. So journaling can be particularly helpful in that. Another strategy can be specifically thinking about changing your mindset. So as I said, it's about often having negative or quite critical attitude towards the task or yourself. It can be fear of failure, for example, perfectionism, low self-esteem. So you can start challenging these thoughts, challenging these beliefs by using some cognitive techniques such as reframing, self-compassion, as we've discussed. Um, can you find uh, can you find something in this task that you like? Can you reframe a task as a challenge, as an opportunity, a learning experience, rather than a threat or a burden or some sort of punishment? You can also think about past times when you were successful, when things worked well for you, to remind yourself of your strengths, of your abilities, of your achievements. And I'm highlighting this again and again. It's about being kind and compassionate, so you reduce the level of stress that you're experiencing in this moment. Be kind and forgiving to yourself when you face difficulties or setbacks. Another quite common strategy can be breaking down your tasks. So feeling overwhelmed, feeling intimidated by the size or complexity of the tasks. So it's about breaking down in smaller chunks, simpler steps, or it can be using Pomodoro technique, for example, which involves working on the task for 25 minutes, followed by a 5-minute break, repeating the cycle until the task is done. Sometimes what is recommended is rewarding yourself. So if it's a lack of motivation or enjoyment, and the task is particularly boring or tedious, unpleasant, so you can reward yourself when you've done some progress, celebrate your success. You can even imagine how you're going to reward yourself and what you're going to do with the free time that you're going to have, because you are not procrastinating as much. Seeking support. Sometimes it can be working around other people. Sometimes it's involving others that can help you to feel motivated, to have some accountability. So this is just some of the basic strategies that can be helpful. It's also recognizing that our world is quite overwhelming and there is a lot of tasks, and it's unlikely that you will go through all the tasks that are on your list, because the new tasks will come, or that you've cleared your mailbox, you have new emails that will come. So it's just recognizing that it is tough to live in a contemporary world with so many demands on the time and attention.
Yeah, certainly. And you've talked about some cognitive strategies. And for people who don't want to or can't get themselves to a place where they can have a therapist or talk to a psychologist or a coach or someone who can help them, how can they set themselves up to do this at home? Is there a specific time of the day they should do this? Are there any tools that they would need? How can they do this in a safe space on their own?
There are resources. We can even, if it's possible, include some links. I can send some links where there's a certain questions that people can ask themselves to help to reframe their thinking. For example, these questions would be coming from cognitive behavioral therapy. What is the evidence for that the worst outcome that I'm predicting is going to happen? What is the evidence against that the worst outcome that I'm predicting is going to happen? What would I suggest to a friend in my situation? For example, if the worst outcome will happen, can I survive it? Will it matter in 5 years' time? So this is a lot of, this is the questions from cognitive behavioral therapy. Sometimes I use a more mindfulness and distancing approach to these thoughts, just noticing that the critical mind is producing all of these thoughts. Can you breathe? Can you notice? Allow these thoughts to pass through and refocus on the tasks that you're doing. So it doesn't require challenging, but it requires learning to distance and not to engage with these thoughts as much. Are these thoughts helpful for you? It's kind of thinking, if you are driving in a car and there is a radio program and it's not very, you don't like, it's not very useful for you, you're kind of reducing the volume of this radio program. It's still there, but you're not paying as much attention. So this is very useful mindfulness skills that people can learn not to engage with their mind as much. Reframing can be particularly useful. You can find what can be exciting for you in this task, what can be benefits. For example, recently I was listening to the podcast with Andrew Huberman, and he was talking about developing these parts of the brain that specifically is developing for us when we are doing tasks that we don't really like, that are difficult tasks. And people who are super agers, they have this part of the brain is actually growing. So they have enhanced cognitive abilities. They are, they have memory, concentration, attention for their age. Let's say they're in their 70s. They're performing as if they are in their 20s. So just thinking about, okay, I'm doing this unpleasant task and I'm increasing this part of the brain can, for me, for example, it serves as a motivator for doing something that I find maybe not as easy to approach. But you can find your own reframes, find your own, something in the activity that you are doing that can help you to continue with it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for sharing that. I feel like there's so many different approaches you can take. And like you said, you find one that works best for you. So we've now listed so many different things we can try. And I think it's important to mention, like you did as well, that there are resources online and questions that you can go through to ask yourself. And I know there's quizzes and there's so many different things we can reach out to as well. So that was really great. So thank you for that. I'd love to transition into our open mic here. And I know that you have something in mind to talk about with us, so I'd love to hand it over to you.
I think with the topic of procrastination, what also comes to mind is the importance of understanding trauma. So I'm really passionate about stopping trauma transmission through relationships and generations. And a lot of my clients who are chronic procrastinators, they actually experienced quite a lot of attachment trauma. For example, when, as I said, emotional regulation, difficulties dealing with stress is a big part of procrastination. So they kind of dissociate if something is quite hard, and it can become quite threatening. If something is hard, it gives you anxiety, it's threatening. So they might go into this numbness, dissociation, the brain shuts down. For someone else, it can be avoidance, it can be distraction, or sometimes it can be overcompensation. I am going to be perfect. I'm going to achieve. I'm going to do this. Let's say it's an email that they need to write. They will be rewriting it 20 times and making sure that it's completely perfect, which means that they are procrastinating and not doing other important tasks in life. So just wanted to, again, the links would be much more complex, but I just wanted to highlight that just understanding this bit of information, how their trauma, complex trauma, attachment trauma, developmental trauma in their lives, that it can be affecting the ways that they're coping with difficult tasks in life, can help to reduce this level of criticism and help encourage the compassion response towards themselves.
So lastly, Alla, I'd love to ask you why it's important to educate ourselves around this idea of trauma and how it impacts us.
I think for there's lots of different reasons why it's important. a lot of my clients, for example, they think that something is really wrong with them, that they are crazy for behaving certain way, for having such a strong response. And so by just understanding why you're having such a strong response, why you're behaving certain ways based on that it's your coping strategy, and it was helpful when you were a child, or there is a certain triggers that is linked to a certain difficult situation in the past, can really help to take away these really strong judgments and really strong criticism, and start understanding yourself and your behaviors with more curiosity and kindness and compassion. And also sort of understanding the trauma and impact will help, again, with hopefully not transmitting this trauma with, in other relationships or towards in their own families, let's say with kids. So understanding the impact of trauma on yourself can help with stopping similar behaviors if the client is noticing that with kids, for example, or with their partners.
Great. Well, thank you so much for bringing up this idea of awareness as well, and raising awareness for why it's important to not just recognize when we're procrastinating or recognize trauma, but also understanding why it's important to learn about it and how it impacts us and our relationships and the people around us. So thank you so much, Alla, for coming onto the show, and I've really enjoyed chatting with you today.
Thank you so much, John. I really enjoyed your questions too.
Thank you. And for our listeners, if they want to find out more about you, where can they go?
I have a website. It's my name and my surname, dralademutska.com. I guess that's the easiest way to find me.
And to everyone listening, we've got Alla's details down in the description below. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time. You have been listening to Work in Progress, the Personal Productivity Science Insights podcast produced by the Life Management Science Labs. Listen to episodes from LMSL's 10 Life Management Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or other podcasting apps on your smartphone. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it and us grow to bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website pp.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Joanna. Thanks for tuning in.